This is Arkham Horror. With 2019 just having started, I thought now would be a good time to exercise my love for one of my favorite games, probably my favorite board game. So I wanted to show off all the stuff that I've made for it, all the custom rules I've developed for it, and kind of play through a series of games to take us all on an adventure together. So I will be playing through my Arkham Horror Introductory Scenarios booklet that I've made available on Board Game Geek, the purpose of which is that we play through a series of 10 games. It's considered 10 chapters. Each one is focused around a specific expansion to the game. Now, here we are beginning on Chapter 1, where there are no expansions being used. That said, I will still use some expansion components, like expansion investigators, because they're universally usable. I'll be using things that I think enhance the game, like personal story cards, and epic battle cards, and injury and madness cards. But I won't be using expansion-themed encounters, and mythos cards and boards, for that matter. So we are going to focus on just the basic mechanics of the basic game. So with that out of the way, what this is not going to be is a tutorial on how to learn to play Arkham Horror. But I will elaborate my thought process, and I will talk about what phases of the game are going on and all the mechanics. So the goal of this is to allow the videos to be watchable both by veteran players who already know the game and brand new players who I'm not going to explicitly teach you how to play the game, but if you watch, you should be able to pick up on it pretty easily. Chapter 1, Cool Air. The year is 1926, and it is the height of the Roaring Twenties. Flappers dance till dawn in smoke-filled speakeasies, drinking alcohol supplied by rum runners and the mob. It's a celebration to end all celebrations in the aftermath of the war to end all wars. Yet a dark shadow grows in the city of Arkham. Alien entities known as Ancient Ones lurk in the emptiness beyond space and time, writhing at the gates between worlds. These gates have begun to open and must be closed before the Ancient Ones make our world their ruined dominion. Only a handful of investigators stand against the Arkham Horror. Will they prevail? This is a Lovecraftian game. It's based on the works of H.P. Lovecraft and kind of the ideas and creatures that he and his circle of writers have developed. And I didn't know anything about Lovecraft really until I got into this game, so it allowed me to read all of his works and understand the lore better. But even if you don't understand the Lovecraft lore, I'm sure there are some snippets that you can pick out, and regardless, there is kind of a supernatural horror setting going on. In addition, this takes place in the 1920s because that's when the stories were written. I was never big on history or recent American history, so that never interested me, though the idea of kind of film noir style investigations is a really popular theme, and it works extremely well in the context of this game. So the aim of the game is that there is an Ancient One, which is one of the many gods or demigods in the Cthulhu mythos, that is threatening to awaken and destroy first Arkham and then the world. The object of the game is to stop him from awakening. So we do that by, well, essentially one of three means. Interdimensional gates will be opening all over the board, causing all sorts of havoc. If we can manage to close and or seal off these gates, we can win the game. If too many of them open, then the Ancient One will awaken, and we do get an opportunity to try to stop, one final opportunity to stop the Ancient One in a final combat, but that usually winds up very, very badly for the players, so that is not the ideal strategy. You should aim to prevent instead of trying to fight at the last minute, because almost certainly it will be your doom. So the way that the game will work is that our investigator characters, I'll be playing 3 for this first scenario, will be moving around the board, collecting these clue tokens, and using them to seal the gates away. Once we have 6 seals down, we've won the game. Alternately, if we manage to close every single gate and other conditions apply, then we can win the game that way, but that's not very easy, so the primary way to win is to seal 6 gates. So, on their adventures, investigators will stop off in locations where they will get random encounters, or they can find themselves in streets where monsters tend to congregate. This green strip here is for locations that are of different dimensions or planets that they'll be traveling to through the gates, and you get random encounters there. And this is all bureaucratic stuff that I'll get into detail as we actually encounter those. But first, let's say hi to our investigators. So first up, we are using Bob Jenkins the salesman. As a traveling salesman, Bob is always on the go, but yesterday he saw something that made him decide to stay in Arkham and miss his train. While he was in the general store selling his wares, a robed man came in and bought several items, paying with old gold coins. Astounded, Bob turned to the shopkeeper for an explanation, but the man just ignored his questions, simply saying, "That happens sometimes." Now, Bob isn't leaving until he figures out where these gold coins came from. If he plays his cards right, maybe this will be the big score. Maybe he'll finally be able to retire and buy that boat he's had his eye on, and spend the rest of his days fishing in a tropical paradise. Then again, maybe Bob will finally come to see that all that glitters is not gold. So Bob Jenkins is the salesman in this game. Every character has got a certain combination of stats, and a nominal kind of occupation, but that dictates their unique special ability. So there are a series of stats. I won't go into detail about what they are, but they're paired off. They're arranged pairwise so that during certain intervals in the game, you are allowed to pair up your stats. In this example, I have his speed set to 3 and his sneak set to 2, but during certain conditions I can raise his speed at the cost of a sneak, and all 3 of these pairs of stats operate that way. In addition, you've probably seen every investigator's got a certain amount of sanity and stamina. If they run out of one of those, they're not completely down for the count, but they're not going to be doing well. Each investigator starts with a certain amount of fixed items and other possessions. And so what we've got here is the collection of things that Bob has. So I'm going to start him with $9 because he is so rich. Now, every investigator starts with some amount of fixed and or random items. So Bob's special ability as a salesman is that he's a shrewd dealer, and that says that whenever he obtains any number of common items, that's green items, those are mundane things. They can be things like guns and knives, but they can also be things like books where you can find information, or other miscellanea. Miscellany is the word I want. His special ability is that whenever he draws any of those, he draws one additional one and gets to pick which ones to keep. So ordinarily he's supposed to start with 2 common items, but now he gets to start with I draw 3 and he picks 2. So let's reveal everything that Bob has. Bob gets dealt 2 dynamite and a lucky cigarette case, so I have to pick one of these to throw away. It might seem obvious to throw away a dynamite, but dynamite is a pretty powerful attack to have. But I do like the lucky cigarette case, because the lucky cigarette case gives you one-time reroll, so I think I actually will get rid of a dynamite. He's also dealt 2 unique items, and unique items are like artifacts. They tend to be magical or enchanted items that you don't run into every day. You usually buy these in strange antique stores or the curiosity shop. So what he gets in this game is Holy Water, which is a one-time attack, kind of like dynamite. It's weaker, but it has magical effects. And the Warding Statue, which lets you instantly kill a monster, or do some certain other... no, that's not quite right. Well, it does magical things. It allows him to prevent stamina damage if he's fighting a monster and doing a bad job, or he can actually cancel the Ancient One's attack if they're actually in final combat. Lastly, Bob gets what's known as a skill. Every investigator starts with approximately 1 skill. There are a couple of rare exceptions. But the skill is like an inherent ability. It's typically a boost to one of his stats and another minor special ability. So Bob has +1 sneak to whatever is on his sheet, and he gets another special ability related to clue tokens. So, as a side note, clue tokens in this game are very vital, but they only do 2 things. One is that if you spend enough of them, you can seal a gate, and the name of the game is Sealing Gates. That's how you win. The second thing you can do is that during random encounters, you can make what's known as skill checks, and that makes you do a random test against one of your stats. The way that you pass a skill check is that you throw some number of dice. Here's an example. Say Bob's fight is at 3, and he's asked to make a fight -1 check. He would use 3 minus 1 equals 2 dice and just roll them together. Now, a check is passed if you roll at least 1, 5, or 6. If you roll none of those, no 5s or 6s, you fail. So in this case, Bob fails his fight check in this hypothetical. But you don't have to accept failure. If you have clues, the other thing that they're useful for, besides sealing gates, is you can throw away a clue to roll one more die. And you can continue until you decide that you just want to fail, or you run out of clues, or you eventually pass. In this case, this is a 1, I failed, too bad. But I brought all that up because the other special ability on a sneak card is that if he's spending clues for sneak checks specifically, he gets 1 additional die, so he'd roll 2 instead of 1. Okay, that's all of Bob's crap out of the way. So, I guess next up we'll talk about Patrice Hathaway. All her life, Patrice has lived for music. The soaring sonatas, the graceful arias, the booming marches have always been her closest companions. But sometimes, as she plays, she can sense something at the edge of her awareness, something that watches her and waits, for what she doesn't know. So when an old gypsy she was swapping tunes with told her that she was being watched by an evil spirit, Patrice listened with somewhat less skepticism than she might have had even a month ago. The gypsy referred her to a shop in Arkham that might have what she needs to get rid of the spirit. That explains why Patrice finds herself entering the curiosity shop this evening, feeling a little silly and more than slightly nervous. So Patrice is a violinist. Based on her backstory, I suppose that she's based off the music of Eric Zahn, which is one of the Lovecraftian stories about a guy with a violin that wards away evil spirits. It doesn't go well for him, as you might imagine. So Patrice's special ability as a violinist is that she is inspiring. She can allow any other investigators to spend her clues, no matter where they are, but only for skill checks. Now, this is an adjusted card. I nerfed her because she was severely overpowered, so unlike the official version, she can only let them spend clues for skill checks and not for sealing gates. Her other special ability is called Ominous Dreams. Every time a gate opens on the board, she gains a clue, and this is going to wind up being pretty powerful. So the things that Patrice will start with is that her common item is going to be also the Lucky Cigarette Case. You can re-roll an entire roll. Her 2 unique items are an Enchanted Knife that simply goes in one hand, you stab things with it, simple enough, and the Flute of the Outer Gods, which seems a little complicated, but essentially you can lose some of your own sanity and stamina, but if you do so, you can completely nuke every monster in one spot. You can run up to a bunch of monsters, initiate combat, blow the flute, and then blast them off the planet. In a real bind, it's a great card to have. She is the only of these 3 investigators to get a spell. A spell is a kind of item card that doesn't usually get thrown away when you use it, but typically can only be used once per turn. The caveat is that for most spells you need to spend your sanity voluntarily to even attempt to cast it, and then there's a chance that the casting will fail. That will be based on your lore slider. So if your lore is low, your chances of failure are high. So in this case, she gets a spell called Shriveling, which is a one-handed spell. You attach it to one hand, and it counts like a weapon. And it's one of the most powerful weapons that you can have. So with her knife, and successfully cast Shriveling, she could do some severe damage. The skill that Patrice starts with is Will. It's an equivalent to Bob's sneak card. She just gets a bonus to Will. Alright, moving on, we have Charlie Kane, the politician. Charlie Kane promised the people of Arkham a safer future. He made a lot of promises. Lower taxes, better schools, less crime. It was part of the job, after all. He said what he had to say to get elected, and then he set about doing what he could to help people. Although he had to do things he wasn't proud of, Charlie always worked for the greater good. The people came first. So when Charlie Kane started hearing the reports, he put the people first. Of course, he couldn't tell anyone, couldn't reveal what he'd pieced together. Reports from various parts of the city government that painted a macabre portrait of Arkham's future. For one, who'd believe him? For another, how would widespread panic serve the public good? Boy, Charlie is an amazing politician, I'll say. Still, Charlie has always had connections in town, so he gathered up his reports and paid a visit to Professor Grant at Miskatonic University. The fact that he now stands before Professor Grant's mutilated corpse in Professor Grant's blood-splashed office does not fill Charlie Kane with confidence. Well, Charlie's, like I said, a better politician than many, so there's a collection of different things you can obtain. We've covered the 3 item types and skills, but there's a 5th thing called an ally. Ally is similar to a skill, but it gives you a stronger bonus and a stronger special ability. So, ally allies have a tendency of leaving the game if the town gets too afraid, because we have what's known as a terror level, and as that increases, allies leave town. So Charlie's special ability plays into that. If an ally has left town, he may still obtain it where otherwise you normally could not. His other ability, called Settle Down, allows him to spend clue tokens to prevent the terror level from increasing. Not nearly as good of a special ability, but if you have a certain condition that's very sensitive to the terror track, it might be worth considering. So Charlie starts with 2 common items. In this case, he gets a map of Arkham that gives him an extra movement point. It'll be helpful because his speed is as low as it could possibly be for a generic character. He also gets food, which will prevent stamina loss. His skill is going to be Fight. Again, it's the equivalent of the Will or Sneak skills. But his ally is Ryan Dean. Ryan gives a bonus to Will and to Sneak, but upon obtaining him, he gives you a random common item. So Charlie gets a 3rd common item. In this case, it's a bullwhip. Okay, alright. So the bullwhip is a one-handed weapon. It's okay. It's got a unique ability that lets it be useful even if you can't equip it in your hand. It's kind of like a reactionary whip. But we'll see if that even comes into play. So, to wrap up the introduction, I simply have to show off these new cards, which are relationships. Relationship cards tie 2 investigators together so that they're not all randomly working together. They actually, in fact, somehow know each other, which is, kind of an interesting thematic and mechanical inclusion. So in this case, what we have is Bob and Patrice are both friendly rivals. As you kill monsters in this game, you will obtain them as trophies, and as you close gates, you will obtain them as trophies. What Friendly Rivals does is that if one of the 2 of these characters has fewer trophies, they get a bonus to either fighting or closing gates. I'm going to try my best to remember everything that's happening for all these characters. I'm probably going to slip up a lot. Oh well. Hopefully it won't be game-breaking. Patrice and Charlie together are fellow travelers. Either character, once per turn, can exhaust this card that is turned on its side. It indicates 1-time use per turn to get 1 extra movement point. So now Charlie has access to 2 extra movement points, and Patrice 1, if they absolutely need it. I'd say that's looking good so far. Charlie and Bob, represented by this card, have the relationship business associates. Whenever either of them gets $1, or any amount of money, the other one gets $1. That should help an awful lot, because Bob and Charlie, I'm sure, are both very interested in money. So, to finally wrap up, what we will do is introduce you to personal stories, which I'm always going to... There's one personal story that allows characters to have their own side mission based on what I read for their backstory. So each one's got a pass and a fail condition that gives a reward or a penalty, and we won't know what will happen until they pass or they fail. It cost Bob Jenkins $2 just to get one of those old coins, but now he had one. He could feel it, heavy and old, in his hand. It was a strange sort of gold, maybe an alloy, and the symbols pressed into its surface didn't resemble any language or art that Bob was familiar with. Well, so it was a funny old coin. That just meant there was an even bigger market for it. All of Bob's senses told him that he was onto something big. Real big. Bob's mission is called Old Money. If he ever has 5 or more clue tokens, he passes his mission. If he ever has 3 or more monster trophies, he fails. So if he kills too many monsters, he's going to fail his story. So Bob is going to start the game, I'm going to check his sheet, at the general store. He's all set up. Whatever this presence was that kept hounding her, Patrice knew she had to get rid of it before something unpleasant happened. According to her gypsy friend, somewhere in this town, there was something that could help her, and she would find it no matter what it took. Patrice's mission is called the Critic. Every time she obtains a unique item, I mark this card. If she marks it twice, she passes. However, if she's ever knocked unconscious or driven insane, that is, runs out of stamina or sanity respectively, she fails the personal story. So I'll move her to her curiosity shop as she investigates her weird occurrences. Finally, it's a nightmare. He'd seen it before, faced it, and lived to tell the tale, but he didn't have to like it. The awful slumbering of a dead god is one thing, but this, on top of it all? Please, Bonnie, say it ain't so. Didn't we just do this? Bonnie left his coffee and walked off with a shrug. Another election. Now, of all times. So Charlie has to deal with a re-election. If he's at the newspaper, which is here, during the upkeep phase, which is the first of 5 phases in a given turn, so the start of a turn essentially, he can spend $15 to pass his story. That's a lot of money. So, he's going to have to... He may already have started with about half of it, but he still has to work to get that 15 together. On the other hand, if the terror level reaches 4, he fails his story. So what I'm going to do is mark the terror level. It starts at 0, it goes all the way up to 10. As you imagine, the higher it gets, I already said that allies leave town, but other terrible things happen too. So now we know that at position 4, Charlie will fail his story. Charlie is going to start at the university's administration building. Okay, but now we need to learn about the Ancient One, because the whole point of the game is to stop this Ancient One. There's a stack of 25 of them here, and they all have different special abilities and different rule adjustments on the game. In this case, since Chapter 1 is called Cool Air, we will be dealing with the Wendigo, Ithaca. Any Ancient One has got a special ability that governs the game. In this case, his is called Icy Winds. If an investigator ends his turn in the streets, he suffers stamina damage. And if a weather event card gets pulled, the weather event gets cancelled. So that's minor. But that means we have to avoid being out in the streets, which are these rectangular shapes. Or else we'll suffer, icy wind damage. In addition, each Ancient One has a Worshipper special ability. So in this bag are all random monsters we'll be drawing for the game. There is one monster called the Cultist, which is generally the easiest monster in the bag, but is also the most susceptible to influence by the given Ancient One in a game. In this case, Ithaca's worshippers eat the flesh of their fellow men, gaining supernatural power through their dark practice. Cultists have 2 additional toughness. Toughness is just a stat on a monster. They generally go from 1 to 3, and it loosely represents how difficult the monster is. Now, cultists will be very weak as far as 3 toughness monsters goes, but that just means that we have to give some additional consideration before fighting a cultist. It could be trouble. Whatever's printed over here is related to the final battle if Ithaca should awaken. I won't go over that unless he actually does awaken. And this position at the bottom is his Doom track. If that fills up, he awakens. So we have 11 spaces on this track. We have to make sure he doesn't awaken. So again, this is not supposed to be a tutorial, although I've been talking an awful lot about the mechanics in this game. I'll remind you that what I'm doing is actually playing with a bunch of custom stuff and house rules. I will try to remember to talk about the house rules when they come up. One such thing is that I'm using thematic starting possessions cards that I have made, so that each player's random pool of items is slightly tweaked to be thematic to their character, and also their starting clues and money are slightly adjusted. So for those of you veterans who notice that players' clues and money counts aren't exactly the same, that would be why. In fact, I did miss one, which you should get a $3. So that's the function of these cards. So there are 5 phases in a turn, but at the very beginning of the game we cut straight to phase 5, which is draw a Mythos card. This deck is the trouble deck. This is where things go wrong. I draw one of these a turn, and it causes gates to open and a bunch of horrible things to happen. So let's see what we got to open the game. This card says a gate opens at the Witch House. So let's open a gate at the Witch House. A gate destroys all the clues that are sitting on it. 2 things happen when a gate opens. Always. A Doom token's added, so we're now at 1 out of 11. And a monster emerges from the gate. So out of this bag, I will draw a random monster. And I won't go into detail about combat until I actually do it. What we have is a cultist. Okay. I already talked about those guys. I think all 3 of us might stand a chance in beating them, but hopefully we won't have to. Next, monsters move. In this case, a cultist happens to move into the street. Then a clue will appear at the Black Cave. The last thing that happens is that Mythos cards are one of 3 types. In this case, this one is a headline type. So I read off a headline, the card does its special ability, and then is discarded. Here the headline is Terror at the Train Station. A rusty train arrives in Arkham, disgorging 2 monsters into Northside streets. Oof. Not a good start, so 2 monsters have already appeared, blocking off Patrice. One of those is a Hound of Tindalos, which is bad news. And the other one is a Rat Thing, which is similarly not so great. Oh, I also forgot to give a clue token to Patrice for a gate opening. Alright, so let's actually start the game. So phase 1 is called the upkeep phase. This is the phase where we refresh all of our sideways exhausted cards so that we can then use them again for a turn. We can adjust our sliders during this time only, otherwise they're locked in place for the whole turn. And we use other special upkeep abilities, of which I don't have any, or at least don't remember any. So, this is the best time to figure out what our plan is for the turn. We need to get clues, but the biggest problem is that Patrice is blocked in by 2 monsters that are varying kind of annoyances. The bigger problem is the Hound of Tindalos, which is going to give her some trouble. So I'm not sure what I'm going to do. I'd like to just blow both of these things away. I could probably do that with the Flute of the Outer God, but yeah, okay, I have an idea. With Patrice, I'm going to crank up my will. I'm going to send her into the streets and use the Flute of the Outer God to destroy both of those monsters. Now, the unfortunate thing is she'll be extremely weakened after that. She'll be in the streets, too, so she'll be susceptible to the icy winds. But that's my plan for her. So I'm going to use my 1 focus point to raise her will by 1 point. And let's see, Charlie's plan is going to just be to get clues, but he should also get money. So I'd like to send him to a place where he can possibly get both. So I'm going to send him down to the woods. He needs 3 movement to get there. I think he'll be okay. Bob is going to get clues if I've got no other things to do. He needs 5 to pass the story, and here's 2 conveniently the Black Cave, so I'll just send him on over to the Black Cave. So, that's it for phase 1. Phase 2 is movement, where in player order, starting with whoever has this token, we all move once. So Bob moves first. He's got 3 speed, so he can move up to 3 spaces, so let's go 1, 2, and when you end your movement, you can collect any or all of the clues. He'll collect them all. Patrice, I'm moving her into the street and opting to engage in combat with the Rat Thing. So the first thing I do against a monster is a horror check using my will stat. So my will is currently 3, plus 1 is 4. Plus 0 is the modifier from the monster. So I gotta throw 4 dice on my horror check. And I need at least 5 or 6 to pass. So I've rolled at least 1, 2 in fact. So I pass the horror check and don't suffer the sanity damage. This is where I'd move into the combat phase where I try to stab him with my knife. But there are a couple special rules with this monster. The first one is that before I even make the combat check, I have to discard an item as he steals it, or else I automatically fail a check. That's no good. So I'm just gonna give him my lucky cigarette case. Here you go, buddy. You can have it. Now, before I actually engage with him and do the combat check, I'm gonna use the Flute of the Outer Gods. It says, lose 3 sanity, lose 3 stamina, before making a combat check to defeat all monsters in your area. So already I've used this thing, but it's defeated both the monsters that are here. I don't have to deal with that nasty hound. So I now have 1 Rat Thing trophy and 1 Hound of Tindalos trophy. So these blood drops indicate toughness. So I now have a total of 3 toughness worth of monsters, which can be spent in certain locations. That's why I have them face down. Charlie is now going to move. I already decided that he was going to go to the woods, I guess. So he's going to move 1, 2, because he has a speed of 2. And now I can either use my map of Arkham or my fellow travelers to give me 1 additional movement point. So he's going to just move in the woods and take a clue. Okay, movement's done. Phase 3 is Arkham Encounters. Every investigator who's in town gets a random encounter, or sometimes can opt to get a specialized encounter if they're at a certain location. So locations are these circular spaces on the board. So Bob's going to get a random encounter at the Black Cave. So let me draw one off the appropriate deck. Now, for simplicity's sake, I'm just going to take the first card that isn't from an expansion and read that one off. Otherwise, we'll be here all day. Bats, hundreds of them, pass a speed -1 check to get out of the cave safely. So, one of the house rules I'll be using is that I won't reveal the entire encounter most of the time. So, I think I know what's going to happen if I fail this check, but I gotta make it. Really, get a life. I have to make a speed -1 check to get out of the cave safely. So, Bob's speed is 3. -1 from the encounter gives me 2 dice. Alright, so I've rolled a 6, which means I've passed the encounter. Let's see what happens. Nothing if I pass. And I'll leave the result of a failure a secret in case we ever see this one again. So Patrice is in the street. You don't get random encounters in the street. I'll skip her. Charlie is at the woods. He does get a random encounter. You have stumbled onto a still owned by the Sheldon gang. Make a sneak -1 check. Well, that's not good. I've run into criminals, so my sneak is 3. Sneak -1. So I gotta roll 2 dice. Hope I don't get beat down. So I failed. I have to either opt to spend a clue to try to pass it, or preserve my clues and just accept failure. So I think I'm gonna just accept failure this time. So let's see what happens. The Sheldon gang works me over while escorting me from the woods, so they deal 2 stamina damage to me. I can discard my food to prevent one of those, so I'm doing that. So I've lost 1 stamina damage. Charlie's got some to spare. And he gets booted into the street. So now he has to succumb to the icy winds. That's everybody. Phase 4 is other dimension encounters, but nobody's in another dimension, so I skipped that. And phase 5 is, well, draw a new trouble card. Draw a new mythos card. So a gate opens at the Black Cave. Well, bad news for Bob. Because if a gate opens where you're standing, you get automatically drawn in. And delayed. So I've placed him on his side because he was surprised by the opening of the gate. That means he won't move next turn. Oops. So as I said before, the gate opening causes a doom token to appear, and a monster to emerge. Black Cave. Okay, crescent and cross monsters move. So that's the cultist, who is a crescent monster. A clue appears at Hip's Roadhouse. And we have the second type of mythos card is an environment card. Typically, an environment stays in play until a new environment replaces it, so whatever this effect is will stay out. However, this particular effect is sunny and clear, which is a weather environment, and recall that Ithaca does not allow weather environments to come into play. So instead of whatever happens for sunny and clear, nothing happens. So it is not sunny and clear, it remains gray and dismal.